what you're sharing. Probably I'd like to start by underlying something that you said, that our spiritual practice and the growth of our spiritual practice is understood correctly, is not really separate from our interaction in the world. And certainly our spiritual practice is an important foundation for the way that we respond to our world, both to our own difficulty, our own emotion, anxiety, anger that arises, and to the events that are around us that provoke those feelings. A meditative practice, any kind of meditative practice, and it takes so many forms, enables us to grow roots of kind of inner steadiness that make it possible for us to withstand stormy weather without falling apart, without, or it helps us even to fall apart when we need to, but to be okay with that. It helps us to be more aware of what's happening in ourselves instead of unconsciously running away from what's happening, and respond mindfully, even to our own emotional distress. So that instead of seeking ways to escape what we're feeling, or instead of having our emotion compel us toward revenge toward someone else who's committed an injustice toward us, we can learn to be responsible for what we feel ourselves. Because no one can actually make us feel anxious or afraid or angry. Right? We have to take responsibility for what we're feeling. Meditation, in a way, reconnects our minds with the heart and enables us to have compassion for ourselves and even for others. Thich Nhat Hanh beautifully speaks about how our mindfulness, our inner steadiness, can allow us to be a presence of compassion for even ourselves, for our own suffering. Like a brother or sister would be a supportive, loving presence in a time when we're upset. In the same way, our own mindfulness can be that kind of presence for ourselves. And we can respond to our own anxiety mindfully, allowing ourselves to feel it and release it, rather than have it compel us in some unconscious way. Because our feelings are powerful forces that are meant to move, not be repressed, or not be unconsciously compelling us to do things that we regret later. Anger in particular can easily lead to hasty action that then creates more injustice in the first place. I was thinking about this and remembered something I'd read in a book by Barbara Kingsolver, where she's quoting someone who lost their son in 9/11. And he writes, this man, Oscar Rodriguez, he said, "I know there is anger, I feel it myself, but I don't want my son used as a pawn to justify the killing of others. We as a nation should not use the same means as the people who attacked us." That was very powerfully said. So by taking responsibility for what we're feeling, seeing how to assist ourselves to stay balanced and clear, then we have a better chance to be skillful in the way that we act in the world. Then the way that we, and I think that meditative kind of practice becomes even more important and more powerful when it's practiced in the context of this world that we live in, right? Rather than just, oh, it's something I'm doing for myself to make me feel good, which is already good enough reason.
Do you mean by that?
Well,
practicing in the context of?
Well, what I mean by that is my spiritual practice has the potential to bring to life the spirit in me, to give birth to what we would call God consciousness. Eckhart Tolle talks about it this way, that you give birth to God when you embody love, when you recognize the oneness in this world of diversity. Meaning, how do we allow our spiritual nature to be as tangible and active in the way that we behave? And certainly a meditative practice is one way that we give life to that presence in ourselves, so that our behavior is not governed by the habitual thought patterns that we formed over years under the influence of our culture, of avidya. Avidya meaning ignorance of our true nature. When we behave based or motivated by just our sense of ourselves as separate, as a separate person, we're in competition with each other, rather than together. We live in a kind of me-centered way of thinking instead of a we-centered way of thinking. So when my spiritual practice is undertaken in that context, there's a much different feeling to it. It's not just for me that I do this. So it's not that I need to buff up, right, with my yoga asana, right, but I need to make peace in my heart. In a way, our kind of science-oriented culture values that which is like provable, right, scientifically verifiable. We say seeing is believing. And that way of thinking discredits the kind of subtle effect of the energies that we produce and contribute to the collective consciousness of our world. So even to consciously meditate and disengage myself from all of this habitual thought pattern that I tend to dwell in and identify with, even to make peace in my own mind is already a powerful contribution to our collective consciousness, to the world itself. Right? At least there's a little more peace in this moment, in this being, and that I can give birth to in a conscious way on a regular basis. That's at least the beginning. It's a step in the right direction. So in that way, my meditation practice is a contribution already. But it can go much beyond that, of course, when the meditation practice is taken off the cushion, right, into the way that I behave. Right? Then in every little thing that I do, what is the energetic effect of that action? How does it reverberate? Things like praying for the well-being of others is again something that a scientific-oriented culture doesn't value. Right? But how many people have benefited from being prayed for? Right? If you've ever felt that in yourself, you won't doubt it for a second, how other people may have been praying for you in a time when you needed it, right? The ones who love you. Right? Actually, in the American way, there are even books written about the efficacy of prayer in that way. Double-blind studies that show those people who were prayed for in hospitals got better faster than the ones who weren't. Imagine doing a study where you say, well, we won't pray for these people. That's the American way. Hopefully it doesn't need to be done over and over again. So That's what the subtle effect of everything. I mean, how many times has an act of kindness had a ripple effect, right, where it made another person soften and feel more generous in their behavior? Right? There was a beautiful movie about this called Pay It Forward. Right? Some of you would be familiar with the young man that kind of came up with this idea that instead of thanking me, you pay my act of kindness forward by your behavior towards someone else. And it beautifully depicted in the movie the effect of that would never be seen by an individual because it ripples out. But what Claudia beautifully mentioned, some of these concepts, these different sutras, right, and the impact that those kind of behaviors could have. I mean, the concept of nonviolence, for example, ahimsa, right, that can be carried into just about anything that you do, as she beautifully said, when you shop. Right? The diet that you choose. And of course it becomes even more complex and more difficult when it's in relationship to another person, not just a piece of produce. That's where the challenge really comes. How do I interact with this person whose behavior is obnoxious or unfair or unjust? Again, if I can handle my own emotional reactions skillfully, I can maintain my balance and I can think about what can I do that would bring some peace, some benefit, right, rather than just reacting in a knee-jerk way that causes another injustice. Forgiveness is a very powerful practice. This same article I read from before, this author, Barbara Kingsolver, wrote this book that's kind of a response to 9/11, a series of nonfiction articles. And she says of herself, there can be no greater spiritual accomplishment than to come through brutal trials and then look back and see that mean times did not render us mean spirits. She says, I can lay no claim to goodness until I can prove that mean people have not made me mean. So forgiveness means that we see with more, we see in a deeper way through just the behavior of a person to the spirit in them beyond that behavior. Right? We can distinguish between those two things. To me, that's a beautiful spiritual practice. To respond with meanness, with mindfulness. To not take that personally, but instead to see where I can create benefit, if any. There's a reading in The Golden Present, a book by Swami Satchidananda that some of you know, where he says, you pour root at the water, is the name of this little reading. You pour water at the root of the tree, instead of the other way around. Right? Meaning, for the tree gives you fruit from up in the limbs, but you don't pour the water up there in the limbs, right? You pour it at the roots. Right? And when the baby smiles at you, right, you don't have to smile back at the baby as a way to thank it, right? You can offer something else. Simply meaning that whatever you can offer as a response to all that we've been given. And that's where I feel that a part of our response to our world and the condition of our world means really taking some conscious action. For example, the way that we're systematically destroying our planet in the name of money and profit, right, for the existing generation, without any foresight towards, or very little it seems, at least in the in in the perspective of some multinational corporations, very little thought about the future and what our current actions what fruit they'll bear. So it behooves all of us, right? And even the governments aren't necessarily acting as quickly as action is needed. It behooves all of us to see what we can do now in our little corner of the planet, and in what ways we want to be active. It doesn't mean that everyone is called to go to a rally. Right? So there was a group of people at City Hall rallying for clean energy this past week. But it means we think mindfully about how do we respond? In what way are we called to respond to that fact of all the ways that our world is being polluted and all the chemicals that are infiltrating our way of life, like all the plastic wrapping on everything. Right? What do we do about that? At least in San Francisco.
And why, like, I think, sorry I'm interrupting.
No, please.
But like what just lately comes to me, like, to the point where I really just have a hard time dealing with, like, why do we find this so normal? Why is it so normal all day? And then once in a while we look at it, like we just, we saw this documentary, it's called Origin, and they really take, can you know that one? They take a status quo of like what's happening right now, like that every baby comes to this planet with like over 200 chemicals in their body. It's just unbelievable. So I mean, I don't even have to go into depth. I mean, you know, it's like we all know what's happening more or less. And it's just so blatantly obvious that we harm ourselves. Like in Germany, we have the saying, like you cut off the twig that you're sitting on. Like, and we find it normal. I mean, that's what I meant, like when I'm too long in town, then I start finding things normal where when I really look at them, it's like, this is madness. This is total madness. And that's probably the question, like how do I want to live my yoga to not just become aware that I said an unfriendly word to you, or, you know, like we try to be more compassionate and kind and all these kind of things. But how do I live my yoga that I don't find those crazy things normal anymore? You know, like, and of course, like, you know, it's like, how do I deal with the anger when I see that our society is based on two columns, like profit and loss, and there's no space for quality or people.
Yeah.
You know, so how do I live in a world where I still have to still have to make a living, you know, to survive somehow? I mean, you guess we can all go and live in Walden Pond, but so this is, I don't know, did you have more things?
Yeah, just the thought that, you know, we happen to live in a very privileged way in a country that is full of wealth, right? Where we aren't struggling for survival, where we're blessed in so many ways with all the natural resources that we need and all the abundance that we have. It seems to me that we should be even more called upon as world citizens to give back, to serve the underserved, to take care of our planet, and to, you know, to be a voice for those that are suffering, right? To bring relief to those who are suffering. And I don't mean that, you know, we should quit our jobs and join the Peace Corps and go to Africa. Though I thank God there are some people that are called to do that. And I don't want to discourage anybody from that. But in what way can we be active right here in our communities? There are people that are suffering and homeless in our communities. In what way can we stand up for that and support that? Right? What about the disaster in Nepal? Like, what do we do about that?
But also, like, how much are we willing to let go of what we used to, what we feel like we deserve or we're entitled to? Like, I start noticing this myself, like, knowing about the severe drought that we have, and it's just a fact, and it's getting worse, and, like, it's really bad. And I notice how I feel like, well, I mean, of course I need a shower every day, and I mean, you know, like, certain things I just need, and it was kind of like, well, maybe not. You know, it's like, how much are we willing to actually change our habits, and then understanding how difficult it is to change habits. Like once in a while I'm aware of it,